Hello and welcome to our London History Podcast, where we share our love of London, its people, places and history. This podcast is designed for you to learn things about London that most Londoners don't even know, all in 20 minutes. I am your host, Hazel Baker, qualified London tour guide and CEO of londonguidedwalks.co.uk. And I am absolutely thrilled to be able to say that our guided walks and our private tours are now bookable online for 2021 and 2022. We also have self-guided tours available and treasure hunts for you to do all on your mobile phone on the streets of London. And if you're a little bit further away from us, then you can do a virtual guided tour, pay and play. And also we have a virtual escape room called Find the Phoenix. Get that cup of tea, put your feet up and enjoy. Joining me in the studio today is Paul Couchman, the Regency Cook, a history food teacher providing online courses using historic recipes that take people back in time. Hello, Paul. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, and it's lovely to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your backstory and how you became the Regency Cook.
I started off as a volunteer in a lovely project called the Regency Townhouse, which is in Hove. It's a restoration of a very beautiful building. And in that building, there was this kitchen. And I helped to restore the kitchen. And because the kitchen hadn't been cooked in, that's when I decided to become the Regency Cook, because I was in the Regency kitchen. So that's where my name comes from. At the Regency Townhouse, we have a very long idea about the Regency. So we don't just think of it as from 1811 to 1820. We expand it right through to about 1850, really. Because what we take is Regency style. And Regency style had a long footprint right up until basically Victorian style started developing. And that took a while. So the Queen Victoria, as you know, came to the throne in 1837. But her actual style, the Victorian style, took a lot longer to develop. And so the Regency style was still very prominent right through, especially in Brighton, especially in buildings as well, right through to the 1860s. Because what you get is people know how to build these beautiful Regency buildings. And they carry on doing it, because there's a demand for it, because the style is popular. And so that Regency style is all over Brighton. And a lot of buildings that you think of as Regency or look Regency were in fact built a lot later.
Yeah, absolutely. The Trafalgar Tavern in Greenwich is known as a Regency style building, and that was built in 1837. So what's really fantastic is that you are working in a kitchen, a Regency-style kitchen, and you are using recipes that would have been made in kitchens like that all over the country. Where did you get these recipes from?
So what I draw on a lot is books from the 18th century, from the 1700s, when cookery writing really took off. Or cookery books really took off, and a lot of these were written by women. And the first one I ever used, and I think it's over here actually, it's probably a bit battered now, but I used this version of Hannah Glasse. So, like I said, I've got this kitchen, it's old, I want to start cooking in it. I don't know much about start cooking at that point, and so I grabbed this book, and it's a book by Hannah Glasse called The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy. Massive big seller in the 1740s, but people still used it right through to the, about 1830s onwards, actually. They were still using it. And so I took recipes from here and started cooking. The first one I did some little cakes at one point at home. They're called Portuguese cakes, and they've got currants in them, and they're flavoured with rose water. So it's quite an 18th century taste as well. So that was the first historic recipe I tried from Hannah Glasse. And then I found all these other books that I started delving into. But the best thing, I think, was when I actually started cooking in the kitchen itself. So I started making mince pies down there from another recipe I found, one of these old books. And just to make an old recipe in an old kitchen, using, the ingredients they probably would have used. You said about goose... about that goose, what's that, goose pimples? Okay, I could feel it in my body. Yeah, that's goosebumps. Yeah, that feeling of everything coming together, almost sort of time traveling as well in that kitchen. And also that kitchen hadn't been cooked in, we think, for about at least 100 years. And so to get back in that space and to use it for what it was used for was really special. Yeah.
Fantastic. And if people were transported back to a kitchen from the 1830s, what would be the most obvious differences?
Yeah. So if I was to take you there, and if we could all go back in time, if you went through the kitchen door, immediately you'd be hit by the heat. Because what you've got is a big old range they used to use, and a big sort of cast iron heated box, really, and they glow and they burn like Argos now, actually, and really heat the space up. So it would have been absolutely boiling hot. So that's the first thing you notice: a great big old range. On the other side, they would have had a massive dresser. So we know dressers now, but really big, really full of storage. Big kitchen table, you can imagine, a big wooden kitchen table in the middle. And then all these people that would have been there. So there would have been probably about 4 or 5, mainly women actually, in the kitchen, all working together. And the kitchen itself is very labour intensive. So there's none of the devices we have now, obviously. So you have to grind things, you have to chop things very small, you have to push lots of things through sieves. So you can imagine all that activity going on. And then if you look above you in this beautiful kitchen, you've got a skylight, which would allow ventilation, but also allow lighting. So you've got this beautiful light that comes from above, and a beautiful tiled floor as well. Yeah. So, I mean, they're different spaces because it's the size, it's the scale of a kitchen in that era. They're very big spaces because you need to fit all these people in, So our kitchens tend to be a lot smaller, don't they? But,
what are some of the most expensive ingredients that would have been used in Regency times in the kitchens?
So, I mean, a few of them we know now is expensive because I was looking into some recipes for saffron buns. And saffron obviously is the most expensive spice, probably the same price they say of gold, And in the period that we were, it was actually manufactured, well, you probably know, or made or grown actually in Saffron Walden and in Cornwall as well. And so that's where you get a lot of saffron buns and stuff come from Cornwall because that's where the saffron came from.
And also Saffron Hill in Clerkenwell. That's how it got its name. Hard to imagine that now. It's in Zone 1.
So, yeah, incredibly expensive, but they did use it a lot.
I don't suppose it's necessarily the ingredient, is it? It's the amount of time it takes to prepare the food. So manual labour, that's got to be one of the big expenses, hasn't it?
Yeah, of course, because if you think about it, and this is always what I love about it, if you think about anything that's processed or mashed at this point, now, like baby food or any pulpy food, that would have taken absolute ages to make. And so it had a high status. So if you had a puree on your table in this period in 1830s, people would know instinctively that there was a poor kitchen maid probably spending a few hours pushing that through a sieve to get to that texture. Whereas now we have a machine that can do that in seconds. And so we don't see that as high status. So, we're looking for, things that have a coarser texture or come from a particular field or something like that. That's got high status now. But there, the processing would have had the high status. So things like jellies and ice creams, which it's quite mass-produced stuff now, but that would have been actually made in-house and would have taken someone days to make. Calves, to make a jelly, you take calf's feet and stuff like that, melt it down to get the gelatin, use that gelatin to make the jelly. All of those processes, now we buy Roundtree's jelly in a little packet and pop that in, don't we? So it's a very different... it's just very different. And so we think of jelly as cheap food, and they thought of jelly as high status food.
And it's amazing, isn't it? So I'm just thinking 1980s when I was growing up, if you went to a kid's party, you'd get jelly and ice cream.
Yes.
2 are mega expensive things in the Regency period.
Yeah. High status, elite food. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. So how would a kitchen like yours get access to ice?
Okay. So what we found, I mean, the townhouse itself is quite close to markets and stuff. So if you think of country houses that are quite remote, country houses would have had a sort of ice cellar, and these are basically great big pits which are brick lines, where I think it may be twice a year you turn up, especially in the winter, obviously, with a great big block of ice, put down into the cellar, and it would very slowly melt then over the year, and they could go and take chunks off it. So that's how you did it in a country house. But in a house like the townhouse, you'd go to the market and get it. And we have storage in the yard as well. We have an old cupboard that we think was actually an ice larder, where they would have put ice, small bits of ice to keep for when they needed it in the kitchen. And that's obviously in the shaded part of the backyard, so it doesn't get any sun at all, so it can keep
Wow.
longer. But they could go and get it from the market quite easily as well. So it's a different relationship. And also our kitchens are quite small compared to country house kitchens, because we didn't need all those extensive rooms, like the dairies. If you go to country house, they often have all these specific rooms for making cheese and stuff. Whereas we can actually buy a lot of that. So not everything was made in a house in the townhouse anyway.
Yeah, very true. And to bring it back to listeners for London, if you want to see an example of an ice house from a country estate, then in Holland Park, there is a converted ice house, which is now a lovely gallery. And also the Canal Museum, Carlo Gatti and his ice production and storage. You can actually learn all about him and the ice that he was doing in the early 1830s there. So there's lots for you to physically go out and explore. And of course, a day trip to Brighton is certainly worth it as well. So we were just talking, Paul, about ice, but what about how do they store their dairy and their fish? Was that different, or was that just an extra layer in the ice cabinet?
So what we think, we've actually got remains of where the cupboards were, which we are going to restore eventually. So what you have instead of a fridge is you have two larders usually. You have a dry larder and a wet larder. And the wet larder is placed close to the back door, so you can get some ventilation in there. And the wet larder is where you keep your fish and your meat, those sort of things. Cheese, if you don't have a dairy larder, as well. And basically, it's a big, cool cupboard. So it's built on the side of the house where no sunlight will hit it as well. And like I said, you've got this ventilation from the back door as well. But usually then somewhere inside the kitchen itself, you've got a dry larder where you keep things like flour and all those other things that need to be kept. You don't want to keep moist. You want them to keep a bit dry, obviously. So those are the two distinctions. And they would have been lined with shelves and stuff. And as I said, we want to put it back in the townhouse as well. I've got like a metal cupboard in there at the moment in the space, but I'd love to have it properly lined, with proper wooden shelves and stuff, so it looked like an old larder. But we do use that space as a larder now, which is quite nice, yeah.
And what about food fashions? Because we touched on a Regency fashion for clothing, which had an impact for many years. What about fashions for food?
Well, we've touched really on the main one. I mean, the ice cream thing was massive. And I loved hearing stories about the bizarre flavours they had. And one of my favourite food fashions, actually, is and I think that somebody tried to bring this back, is a sort of Parmesan ice cream. So they made ice creams with more. I think there was one of asparagus as well. They did some pea ice creams as well. I've seen recipe for, which is quite unusual, And you think nouveau cuisine and those sort of things, they probably it's paid for that as well. Have you had Parmesan ice cream before?
You know what? I haven't. I've had olive oil ice cream, and that was weird. But I think pea ice cream would be lovely and refreshing. But asparagus, that makes some people pea smell, doesn't it? I don't think. Yeah. Let's pass on the asparagus.
And the colours, so imagine the colours.
I know. I mean, my favourite ice creams are either pistachio or almond.
Yeah, and both of those are really 18th century. Almond is in loads and loads of recipes, and pistachio as well. Because of the colours and the textures and the taste, obviously, of both of them, but very popular. Yeah, if you think of macaroons, and we will touch on Bridgerton next time, but it's one of the things you see in all the sets is the macaroons. Yeah. So obviously that's the almonds, and you get pistachio and macaroons as well. So two tastes together.
Yeah. Oh, and you mentioned before the combination of currant and rosewater. I wouldn't have said they went together, but how were they?
Delicious. You've got to be a bit careful with the rosewater. You don't overpower it because it tastes like rose soap or something. Yeah, you don't want that. You've got to be really careful. But serve it a lot to people, and they really like it. It's got a sort of.
Mm.
And I was talking this morning with someone about rosewater. She was from Iran, and of course they use it a lot there, and in India as well. Those traditions are still carrying on, and they use it a lot in food, especially rose petals are used in food. So you can see the links between things we were doing in the 18th century and things that are still happening in food all over the world now. So the tastes are still good. It's just we've got out of the habit of putting them into our food. We don't use rosewater much, do we? Very, very rare now.
I do dry my own roses from the garden and my own lavender
Class.
to put on with lemon biscuits. Lavender and lemon.
Yes. Again, you've got to be careful, haven't you? And yeah, you can put too much in, but that hint, just the hint, is beautiful, isn't it? Yeah, I love those flavours. Be good in ice cream as well, wouldn't it? We talked about ice cream. Yeah.
We talked about the fashions of Regency food, and what about the fashion for having a French chef?
Really, from the 1700s right through to the 1800s, if you were anyone, you'd have a French chef. And of course, the most famous French chef was Karim, and he worked for, I think, 3 years for the Prince Regent at the Pavilion and made amazing menus. But of course, what the royals do, everyone else wants to copy. And so French chefs were either you had one permanently or you'd hire one in for the pre-evening party. And we can just imagine how the normal cook would be really quite upset to have this man suddenly turn up and take over the cookery for the evening. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in those households. Can you imagine them not helping? You'd do this like antagonism going on. It'd be wonderful to watch. But yeah, that's what they did. So they hired them in for, the thing is, in this period as well, men were paid double the amount of women anyway, and a French chef then could command even more than a normal male cook. So you can imagine the amount of money that must have been spent on these people. Yeah, so I think a lot of French chefs did very well at this period. Yeah.
And weren't there stories of families pinching other French chefs?
Yeah, this is very common. I mean, the thing is with servants anyway, if you had a really good servant, a good housekeeper, a good cook, when people turned up for parties, you'd often hear stories about how they, you'd catch them chatting with the cook or the housekeeper to try and persuade them to come and work with them. Because there was always this talk about the servant problem, about finding good servants, especially keeping them, because, I've got books of stories of when it went wrong, because you've got lots of reports in the papers about, servants stealing really badly, actually, or not being prepared to do certain things and the employers having to placate them, all those sort of stories went on. So it wasn't easy. So keeping a servant wasn't an easy thing. It sounds lovely, doesn't it? But actually, there was a lot of problems involved in it. And it's lovely to read the reports. It's really, really, really good.
So I know you've been doing a course recently, Paul. What have we got to look forward to in the future from you?
I've just finished a hot cross bun course, basically. So I teach to people all over the world now. So it's all online, and they sort of land in my kitchen through Zoom, and we cook the things together, which is lovely. And I do seasonal ones. So basically, I've just done the hot cross buns, but I do Christmas pudding ones at Christmas. Christmas cakes will be coming up at some point as well. I thought for this next one I'm going to do is about pies. And I've also thought about doing a Chelsea bun one. And the way you can contact me, Chelsea, he doesn't like a Chelsea bun, and there's loads of history to it as well. The best way you can get in touch with me is through my website. And there's also, you can just join my email list. So I send out an email every week with a few of the recipes from the book, actually. So I take one or two recipes from here and just pop them in an email and send them out to people. And also, then you'll know when my next courses are.
And we'll include all of Paul's details in the show notes if you go to londonguidedwalks.co.uk/podcast and click on episode 55. I'm on that list, so I get the weekly emails, and I am, yes, and that chocolate tart. Oh my goodness! You think we're just very, very bad for my waistline, Paul? Yes, the chocolate tart.
Yeah. I should tell people the chocolate tart is a Hannah Glasse recipe, also from about the 1740s. And I got it as a sort of lead magnet, a free resource that people can sign up for. But I get lots of reports from people who've made it. And it's somebody made it for their birthday, which I loved. She told me about it. She said, I've got this birthday coming up. I'm going to make it for my partner. And she made it, and she told me how lovely it was. And it's so lovely. That's why I do these things, to make other people happy with food. It gives me great pleasure myself.
Well, Paul, you've been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us today. And if you're a fan of the Regency period, then maybe you'll enjoy episode 37, which is Bridgerton and Regency London. And we also have episode 49 with the wonderful Hilary Davidson, a dress historian who busts some myths on Regency-style dress, including corsets, visible nipples, and the invention of the trouser. But that's all we've got time for now. Thanks very much, and I'll catch you next week.